Every year, teams at major studios, hospitals, and investment banks sit in a room and do something that sounds insane. They pretend their project has already failed. Not might fail, already failed. Then they work backward to figure out why. Psychologist Gary Klein built this into a formal business technique in 2007. Daniel Kahneman, the man who won a Nobel Prize for studying how human judgment breaks down, calls it the single most useful tool he has ever used, but neither of them invented it. A Roman senator was doing the same thing to himself, on purpose, every morning, 2,000 years before either of them was born. Here's the problem this solves. Most of us handle uncertainty in one of two broken ways. We either refuse to think about what could go wrong because it feels negative or unlucky, and then get flattened when it happens anyway. Or we think about it constantly, in a useless loop of vague dread that never turns into a plan. Neither one prepares you. Neither one reduces the anxiety. There's a third option, and it's uncommon enough that most people never try it on purpose. In the year 64, the city of Lyons burned to the ground in a single night. It wasn't a slow disaster. There was no warning. A wealthy Roman colony was simply gone by morning. Seneca's friend Liberalis, who was from Lyons, was devastated, not just by the loss, but by how blindsided he was. He had prepared for ordinary setbacks. He had never prepared for this. Seneca wrote to him with a line that has outlived the empire itself. What catches us off guard hits far harder than what we saw coming. Unexpectedness is what turns a disaster into a catastrophe. This wasn't comfort talk. Seneca had already lost his fortune once, been exiled once, and would later be ordered by Emperor Nero to end his own life, an order he received calmly because he had spent years rehearsing exactly this kind of morning in his mind before it arrived. He called the practice premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. Every day, deliberately imagining what could be taken from him, his health, his position, his life, so that if it happened, it would already feel familiar. Here's the distinction that gets lost every time someone dismisses this as just anxiety with extra steps. Pessimism is passive. It's dread with nowhere to go. Premeditatio malorum is structured, time-boxed, and specific. You don't sit around worrying that things might go wrong in general. You pick one real upcoming event and you deliberately walk through a specific version of it failing. Not the vague fear, the actual mechanism. Not, what if this presentation goes badly, but what if the client asks about the number I haven't verified and I don't have an answer? Then you either fix that hole in advance or you rehearse how you'd respond if it opened up anyway. Either way, the surprise, the thing that actually destabilizes people, is gone before it happens. Start with Gary Klein, a cognitive psychologist who noticed something in workplace risk assessments. When you ask a team, what could go wrong, they hedge, stay polite, and miss things, because pointing out a coworker's blind spots feels disloyal. So Klein flipped the question. Instead of what might go wrong, he had teams imagine the project had already failed a year from now and asked them to explain why. That single grammatical shift from might to did roughly doubled the number of real risks people identified. He called it a pre-mortem. Daniel Kahneman later wrote that it's the closest thing he has to a favorite decision-making tool because it uses psychological distance to strip away the optimism bias that makes every team confidently predict their own project will be the exception. Pixar's story team runs a version of this before committing real budget to a film, deliberately hunting for the exact scene where the story would fall apart before it's expensive to fix. Then there's Julie Norem, a personality psychologist at Wellesley College who has spent decades studying what she calls defensive pessimism. Her finding, repeated across dozens of studies, a significant share of naturally anxious people, by her estimate around a third of adults, perform measurably better when they set low expectations and mentally rehearse worst-case outcomes in advance, compared to when they force themselves to think positive. Forced optimism doesn't remove their anxiety. It just makes them less prepared for the moment the anxiety was warning them about. For this group, imagining failure isn't a symptom to suppress. It's the actual mechanism that lets them perform. Seneca's morning practice, Klein's pre-mortem, and Norem's research on defensive pessimists are, functionally, the same move performed in 3 different centuries. Convert formless dread into a specific, examinable scenario, and the dread loses most of its power. Here's how to actually run this in under 10 minutes before anything that's making you anxious. A deadline, a hard conversation, a launch, a decision you can't undo. Step 1. Name the event specifically. Not this week, One thing. Step 2. Fast forward. Imagine it's already over and it went badly, not vaguely, specifically. Write down the one sentence that explains why it failed. Step 3. Sort what you wrote into 2 columns, things you can act on now and things you can't control at all. If it's in the first column, do the smallest possible thing today to close that gap. If it's in the second column, that's not a task. That's a boundary. Rehearse your response to it, then set it down. Step 4. Do this once on paper and stop. The whole point is that it's bounded. If you're doing this every night for the same event, it's stopped being a system and turned back into the loop we started with. Seneca wasn't trying to make liberalis sad about Lyons. He was pointing out that liberalis had been ambushed by something he could have partially seen coming, and the ambush was the part that broke him, not the fire itself. 2,000 years later, the researchers who study this for a living arrived at the same conclusion through entirely different methods. The version of you that already imagined the bad outcome is not the anxious one. It's the prepared one. If this kind of cross-checking, old philosophy against what the research actually says, is useful to you, that's the whole premise of this channel. Next week, what actually happens in your brain when you try to just let go of something. Subscribe if you don't want to miss it.